The chamber was silent except for the hiss of hot metal. The air trembled from the heat that radiated off the monstrous device in the center of the room. An object forged not for war, not for work, but for agony. They called it the Iron Chair, a creation of pure cruelty, born from the twisted depths of the human mind during the darkest centuries of medieval Europe. To look upon it was to stare into humanity's most horrifying reflection, the desire to break another soul not just in body, but in spirit. This was no ordinary seat. Its back, armrests, and even the seat itself were covered in hundreds of iron spikes, sharp enough to pierce flesh but not deep enough to kill outright. Beneath the seat, a system of braziers and charcoal trays waited, ready to turn the metal red hot. When fire met iron, the chair became an instrument of living death, cooking the victim slowly from the skin inward. The Iron Chair was not born in one place or one era. It appeared in many forms across Europe, in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, evolving through centuries of superstition, fanaticism, and fear. In the medieval mind, pain was not only punishment, it was purification. To suffer was to cleanse sin, to burn away evil. And so, in dark chambers beneath castles and inquisitorial halls, the Iron Chair was seen not as murder, but as divine justice. The accused would be brought in, their crimes read aloud by torchlight: witchcraft, heresy, blasphemy, conspiracy. Most were already broken from days of interrogation. Many could hardly stand. The torturers, cloaked and cold-faced, would guide them toward the device as priests murmured prayers in Latin. The scent of burning oil and iron filled the air. It was said that even the bravest knights, upon seeing the Iron Chair, would fall to their knees in horror. The prisoner would be stripped of their garments. The body, pale and trembling, glistened with fear. The iron spikes were polished, not for cleanliness, but to ensure that the flesh would not stick too soon, that the torture would last longer. When the victim was seated, each movement drove the spikes deeper into the skin. Chains would fasten their wrists and ankles. Some versions of the chair had iron bands that tightened around the chest and thighs, locking the body in place so that escape, even the movement of breath, was impossible. Then came the fire. Charcoal or embers would be placed in trays beneath the seat. The executioner would light them one by one, starting slowly, letting the heat rise. Within minutes, the metal began to glow. The victim's flesh would sizzle where it touched the iron. The first screams would echo through the stone walls, mixing with the crackle of fire and the dull hum of iron expanding under heat. The pain was beyond imagination, a slow and deliberate roasting, but the victim would not die quickly. The spikes prevented the skin from forming blisters, forcing the heat to penetrate deeply. The body would twist and convulse, but every movement only deepened the wounds. The eyes would bulge from suffocation and shock. The heart would pound wildly, trying to cool a body that was literally cooking from below. Sometimes, to make the torture more unbearable, water was poured over the victim to create bursts of steam. The hissing sound filled the chamber like the whisper of demons. The executioners would watch in silence, trained not to flinch. For them, this was duties or worse, entertainment. The Iron Chair was most famously used during the Inquisition. The Church claimed it was a tool of truth, to extract confession, to prove guilt, to save souls through suffering. But in truth, it was often used to silence the innocent, to crush political enemies, or to force peasants to surrender secrets they did not have. Women accused of witchcraft were among the most common victims. To the inquisitors, a confession wrung from the agony of the Iron Chair was divine proof. There was a terrible logic behind it. If she confessed, she was guilty. If she did not, the fire would purify her soul. In both cases, she would burn. But the Iron Chair was more than a method of torture. It was a symbol of control. In medieval Europe, fear was the greatest weapon of all. Rulers, inquisitors, and executioners understood that pain shaped obedience. When a crowd witnessed the chair, they saw what awaited those who defied authority. The screams that echoed from dungeons became warnings to those above ground. Obey, believe, submit. In the German city of Nuremberg, records describe an iron chair with more than 1,500 spikes. The victim was bound so tightly that even breathing was torment. The executioners would heat the seat until the metal turned nearly white, and the body, trapped between iron and fire, would blacken, flesh fusing to steel. The smell of burnt skin filled the air like incense of death. In France, some versions of the chair had mechanical arms that pressed the victim tighter as the metal expanded. In Italy, the device was sometimes paired with other tortures, iron boots, thumbscrews, and branding irons, to extract confessions. There were even accounts of kings and nobles attending such judicial interrogations, watching in fascination as the condemned writhed in unbearable pain. To understand the iron chair is to confront the terrifying extremes of medieval thought. This was an age when the line between justice and cruelty vanished. Religion and power blended into one, and suffering was sanctified. The church preached mercy from pulpits but practiced terror in cellars. The iron chair stood as a monument to that hypocrisy, a throne of agony draped in the language of salvation. Yet even as centuries passed, the device remained. In some regions it was used not just by inquisitors but by secular courts, executioners, and even monarchs. Torture was seen as a tool of truth. A confession under fire, they believed, could reveal the will of God. But what it truly revealed was how deep human cruelty could descend when justified by faith or fear. There were those who opposed it, philosophers, priests and reformers who called torture an insult to God's creation. Some argued that the pain only made men say what their captors wished to hear. Others said that no confession earned by agony could be trusted. But their voices were whispers against the roaring fire of the iron chair. Imagine standing in that dungeon, the air thick with smoke, the smell of blood and the glow of molten iron flickering against stone walls. You would see the executioner's face illuminated by firelight, his eyes reflecting no pity. The priest would stand beside him reciting prayers to cleanse the soul of the victim. And in that moment you would realize that this was not justice, and it was ritualized cruelty, wrapped in holy words. Those who survived, once a rare few, were forever marked. The scars of the spikes never faded, the burns never healed. Some went mad, haunted by the memory of their flesh melting upon iron. Others were left crippled, unable to walk, their bodies reminders of man's inhumanity. But for most there was no survival. Death came slowly as the heart failed or the lungs burned from heat and smoke. The iron chair was not merely an execution device, it was a statement. It declared to all, "This is what happens when you defy those who hold power." It was fear made flesh, pain turned into a spectacle. In the centuries that followed, as Europe began to awaken from the dark age of superstition, the iron chair became a relic of horror, locked away in museums, displayed as a reminder of what humans are capable of when mercy is forgotten. Visitors would look upon its twisted frame and shudder, struggling to believe that such a thing had once been used by men who called themselves civilized. But in the echo of those dungeons, if you listen closely, you can still almost hear it. The faint crackle of embers, the hiss of iron meeting flesh, and the last desperate screams of those who burned alive, seated upon the throne of pain. And as history tells us, the iron chair was not the only device of its kind. It was part of an entire system, a world where confession was more valuable than truth, and where suffering was sanctified as proof of faith. Yet of all those instruments of torment, the rack, the wheel, the pair of anguish, none carried the same horrifying symbolism as the iron chair, because it looked so ordinary. A chair, a thing meant for rest, turned into a tool of death. That irony was the cruelest part of all. The same object that symbolized peace in the home became a throne of torment in the dungeon. A seat meant to support the living became the resting place of the dying. And as the flames licked higher, the inquisitors would watch in silence, believing they were serving divine justice, when in truth, they were only feeding the endless hunger of cruelty itself. For in the end, the iron chair did not just burn flesh. It burned away the illusion that faith alone could restrain man's darkness. It proved that when power hides behind righteousness, no soul is safe from the fire. The iron chair did not disappear when the flames of the Inquisition died down. Its shadow lingered in the corners of Europe's conscience, a ghost of fire and iron, whispering of all that men can do when fear becomes faith and justice becomes vengeance. Even when the last of the inquisitorial chambers were emptied and the clerical courts began to fade into history, the chair remained in hidden basements, castle dungeons, and torture houses, passed quietly from one regime to the next. The reason was simple. Pain works. At least that is what those in power believed. Pain could silence rebellion, extract secrets, enforce loyalty. For kings, popes, and tyrants, the iron chair was not just a weapon. It was a philosophy, the belief that terror could sustain order. By the late Middle Ages, the device had spread far beyond the church. In the German principalities, executioners, or Scharfrichters as they were called, kept the iron chair as part of their official instruments. They were public servants of death, men who combined the coldness of engineers with the obedience of soldiers. To them, the chair was neither holy nor evil. It was simply a tool, one among many. In their journals, they wrote of it with chilling precision. The iron to be heated to dull red, the confession to be taken before the skin blackens. In the French provinces, it was known as la chaise de fer. In Italy, la sedia del dolore, the chair of pain. And in Spain, where the Inquisition had perfected the art of spiritual terror, it was often placed near the auto da fe, the public ceremony of faith where confessions were read and punishments delivered. To the crowd, it was both spectacle and warning. They did not have to imagine the screams. They could hear them echoing from beneath the earth. As centuries passed, the iron chair began to evolve. Some designs included mechanisms that allowed the spikes to pierce deeper with each movement of the victim. Others added footrests or head clamps to ensure complete immobilization. The goal was no longer merely to kill. It was to destroy the human spirit before death. Historians later described the medieval dungeon as a theater of power. Every object, every flickering torch, every echoing scream was part of a performance, a message to all who might think of defiance. In those dark halls, rulers and inquisitors became gods, deciding who would live, who would burn, and who would confess. But the iron chair also reveals a deeper truth about the human heart, that cruelty does not appear suddenly. It grows slowly, disguised as justice. At first, it was used only against heretics and witches, those already deemed unworthy by society. But once such instruments were accepted, their use spread. Soon it was thieves, traitors, rebels, and even debtors who felt the iron. One story, preserved in the archives of Florence, tells of a man named Matteo de Luca, accused of plotting against his lord. He was bound to an iron chair for hours while heated slowly beneath him. The record says, he confessed all before the seat grew red. His confession was later proven false. But by then, Matteo's body had already been reduced to charred remains, his guilt meaningless. And so the iron chair achieved what it was meant to. Not truth, not justice, but fear. By the dawn of the Renaissance, Europe had begun to change. Science challenged superstition, reason questioned faith, and philosophers spoke of human dignity. Yet even then, the iron chair survived, hidden beneath the polished floors of civilization. When men spoke of progress, the dungeons below whispered otherwise. In 1560, in the city of Nuremberg, a visiting scholar wrote of his horror upon being shown the instruments of torture. He described the iron chair in detail, a seat bristling with needles under which a fire may be kindled so that the body is roasted alive. He called it a work of the devil, wrought by man's own hands. His words captured the growing unease of an age awakening from darkness. And yet, the age of enlightenment did not kill the iron chair. It only refined it. In the centuries that followed, new empires arose, new governments took power, and new philosophies justified the same old cruelty. In the prisons of the French, revolution in the interrogation chambers of absolutist kings, even in the secret police basements of later centuries, the idea of the iron chair, if not the chair itself, remained alive. Because the chair was more than metal, it was a method. It was the belief that fear can make men speak, that pain can make them obedient. That belief never truly died. Those who study torture today often look at the iron chair as the ancestor of modern interrogation devices. The principle is the same, to make the human body the battlefield of truth. But the difference between medieval and modern cruelty is only in appearance, not in essence. In museums across Europe, in Vienna, Prague, Toledo, and Paris, you can still see the iron chair behind glass. The metal, darkened by age, still bears the faint marks of heat. The spikes, though rusted, remain sharp. Tourists gaze upon it with disbelief, whispering that no one could have survived such torment. But the truth is many did, at least long, enough to scream, to beg, to confess to things they never did. Some visitors report feeling a strange heaviness standing before it, as if the air itself remembers. Perhaps it does. After all, pain leaves echoes, not just in flesh, but in stone. What makes the iron chair so haunting is not only the suffering it caused, but the mirror it holds up to us. When you look at it, you see how far people will go when they believe cruelty is righteous. You see the cost of blind obedience, of justice without mercy, and you realize something even darker. That the iron chair was not built by monsters, but by ordinary men, blacksmiths, judges, priests, all convinced they were doing the right thing. That is the true horror. In the modern world, we like to think ourselves free of such barbarity. But the same instincts, the hunger for control, the fear of dissent, the willingness to inflict suffering in the name of order, still live within us. The iron chair may have cooled, but the idea behind it burns on. It burns in every act of oppression, in every system that values obedience over compassion, in every government that silences truth through fear. The iron chair is not just a relic of the Middle Ages. It is a warning carved in steel. When archaeologists unearthed one of the last known iron chairs in the ruins of an old fortress in Spain, they found something chilling beneath it. Human bones, fused with fragments of metal. Centuries had passed, but the bones were still, scorched black, welded to the very seat that killed their owner. It was as if the iron refused to let go, as if the pain itself had been trapped within. Standing before it, one historian wrote, "You cannot look at this chair and not feel the weight of all that was lost, the screams, the innocence, the humanity." He was right. For every person burned alive upon that throne of agony, countless others lived in silent fear, shaping their lives to avoid the same fate. That fear built kingdoms, fueled wars, and kept empires in power. Fear, that was the true legacy of the iron chair. Yet even in its cruelty, there were moments of defiance. Records tell of prisoners who refused to confess, who died in silence rather than speak falsehoods. Their courage became whispers of resistance that later generations would remember. They proved that even in the face of unbearable agony, the human spirit can remain unbroken. When the age of torture finally began to fade in the 18th and 19th centuries, reformers fought to ban such practices. They called the iron chair an abomination, a stain upon civilization. In France, the revolution outlawed torture in 1789. Other nations followed slowly. The devices were destroyed, buried, or locked away. But the memory endured, a scar on the conscience of Europe. Writers, painters, and philosophers would later use the image of the iron chair to represent tyranny itself. It appeared in art as a symbol of oppression, in literature as a metaphor for guilt and suffering. Each depiction served as a reminder of what happens when power loses empathy. And yet, for all its horror, the iron chair tells a necessary truth: that civilization is fragile. Compassion must be guarded, or cruelty will return wearing new names and new justifications. The iron chair's story ends not with its destruction, but with its silence. In the museums where it rests, the air feels heavy, the light dim. You can almost imagine the faint shimmer of heat still clinging to it. It is quiet now, but that silence is deceptive. It is the silence of lessons learned too late. Some say if you stand before the chair long enough, you begin to hear something. Not the screams of the dying, but the slow, rhythmic beat of a hammer on metal. The sound of it being forged, a reminder that every act of cruelty begins not with the fire, but with the choice to strike the first blow. The iron chair burned flesh, yes. But more than that, it burned away illusions. It showed the world the true face of power without mercy. And in its shadow, humanity was forced to ask the hardest question of all: how far will we go and what will we become when we believe pain can purify truth? The iron chair no longer burns. The fires are long cold. But in the echo of history, its heat still lingers, a warning carved into the bones of time.